not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want the meat of this session to be the opportunity for us to hear from the people who have taken that step and adopted. But for those of you who are not really aware of what HPL is about, it's really based on two core premises. One premise is that we now know from neuroscience, psychology, and genetics that it's quite likely that every single one of us is capable of achieving highly. So the old days of sort of thinking that some people have the capability to do well and others didn't is probably pretty outdated now. So what we're really looking to do with you is to establish a culture where we assume that everyone can, and we're building towards that destination. It doesn't mean that everybody will, or certainly not tomorrow, but it means that we are developing, we're building the neural pathways that help people to achieve highly. And the second part of HPL is about, well, how do we do that? And how we do that is that we take what we know from the research into how the most successful people think and learn, and we bring that into the classroom. Now, when we do that, that isn't what we know about how successful people think and learn is not rocket science. You'll be doing some of it already in your school, but you're working at a kind of, although well-intentioned, your teaching and learning is at a suboptimal level because you don't quite know which things make the big difference. So what you're kind of doing is tweaking to get more out of your teaching and learning. So this isn't something that you bolt on the side of what you're doing, and it isn't about wholesale change where you're out with the old and in with the new. It's about looking at what you do now and how you can do it more effectively. And we have a kind of framework for that, a structure, and then we assist you to adopt that in your school and operate as an HPL school. So it's a long-term solution to teaching and learning. It's a long-term strategy. It can work in any kind of school with any kind of curriculum. It's a pedagogy. And what it delivers is it helps you to be more consistent in terms of a culture around high expectations. So you get a consistent culture of high expectations. It helps you to systematically build in your students the competencies that we know lead to not only cognitive, but also lifetime success. People thrive. And it does so by making really explicit and public those competencies. So it means your students know and understand how to get better. Your staff have a kind of teaching toolkit, and their parents are in a position to support. So that's it in a nutshell. For people who were familiar with that already, hope it wasn't too long. And for those of you who have less familiarity, very happy to follow up on that with you on another occasion, or we have lots of material we can share with you to do that. So I want to kind of get on to the kind of meat of what we're here to kind of talk about. And I guess one of the things I think that interests people when they're having a kind of thinking about all of this is to ask the question about, well, you know, why did Matthew, why did you choose to adopt HPL in your schools? What was your kind of thinking behind that in terms of taking it forward? So if we start with Matthew Burke at Cheltenham, what were you thinking, Matthew? What did you want to do with it?
So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, where we are in terms of Cheltenham, it was the main drive was really about making sure that parents and the wider community could see that we were taking the academics seriously. So on our doorstep, within 25 minutes of where Chris and I have sat, we've got 7 grammar schools, which obviously means that parents around here have a phenomenal choice with regards to what education they'd like and whether they choose to pay for that education or not. And so the school had always had a strong pastoral reputation. Children were happy, they were safe with regards to the school, but it was often referred to as a kind of, if you didn't get into grammar, then you might go to St Edward's. And so part of it was about making sure we were the first choice for parents and families who would benefit from what we are, but also to say, look, you know, we're not compromising on the academics here. We're not changing what we are as a school from an ethos point of view. And what helped us tremendously was that the only other school locally that had adopted HPL at that point was Pates Grammar, which is one of the most selective schools in the country, one of the most selective state schools in the country. And for parents to see that we were embarking upon a similar journey didn't worry them that we were going down that selective grammar route, but saw that they thought, you know what, St Ed's is doing well from an academic point of view, and if they're going to embark upon the same programme that Pates has done, then actually that's where we'd like our child to go, because they're going to get the holistic education that St Edward's has always had, but also now, and to be fair, they didn't before compromise on academics, but it just gave us that thing from a public point of view to say, look, we're going to do well academically by your children.
So thanks, Matthew. Well, let me say that, you know, the kind of market positioning is one of the reasons that a number of schools, quite a lot of our schools, choose HPL. Not the single reason that they choose it, but it's in the mix there. I think Matthew M from St Edmunds. I mean, you came at this from a slightly different perspective, didn't you? And it would be interesting to hear your kind of thinking in terms of how you came to HPL. I think you're on mute, Matthew.
No reason.
Oh. I can't hear him. Can you hear him, people? No.
No. Cannot hear him.
Try that one.
Hey, yes.
That one.
Well done.
I've no idea why or what's going on, but anyway. Yes, so we came to it, I suppose, quite slowly, and actually getting involved with HPL predates my time here at the college. I've been here for 5 years, but really it was Kathy Noble, who's with us, who as assistant head teaching and learning introduced us to HPL. So perhaps Kathy could answer the first part of the question, you know, in terms of the early days.
Yeah, so Matthew's absolutely right. We had a change of headmaster, and Matthew started just as I was oiling the wheels for us to really have a go with HPL. And what had happened was that we knew we needed a shift of mindset in the school. We needed teachers to shift to a growth mindset, but we felt, well, we can see that happening positively in the prep school, but at college level, we felt that we needed more language. We needed more common language that we could use in our teaching and our lessons, and across the whole school with the teachers and the pupils. And so I started doing some research and came across the Red Book, and I found the language that I knew could be our leverage to really engaging the teachers in the philosophy, which we needed, the growth mindset, so changing mindsets, but then also having this really rich language, which would be you know, not just common across teachers and pupils, but also really good CPD, really good refresher in pedagogy for teachers at whichever point in their career they are, and an excellent focus for everyone. So that's where we came at it from. We needed every teacher to have high expectations of all the children, not just the few that they favoured, and it was something that then Matthew started the school, and I presented it to him, and he agreed to us trialling it, which we did. We went into a pandemic, but actually found HPL really helpful at points during that, and yeah, that's where we're at.
And I think we then, reached the point after. I mean, obviously the pandemic slowed down the whole process, but having been sort of engaging with the key principles of HPL and dabbling with it, as it were, and I think we've probably sort of reached a point where we've got to make a decision now. Either we get on board fully and make the most of all the wonderful support and training that's available, or we say no, this isn't for us. And I think it was a pretty easy decision when the time came, because enough of the heads of department and enough of the teachers were on board and enjoying what we were doing. So we took the decision to get on board fully. Had it not been for pandemics and things getting in the way, we probably would have made that decision a bit sooner.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, for that. I mean, because I think what we know from when I talk to and other people talk to schools, I mean, there are some reasons why schools tend to adopt, and one of them is around bringing staff together around a common purpose, and especially if you're through school, actually having the same pedagogy operating right through all phases of school does bring some harmony and continuity to the piece. And it also means that people who are teaching in different subject areas can talk to each other around the same kind of ideas, which doesn't always happen, as we all know. So those are two of the kind of reasons why the schools tend to adopt HPL, to strengthen teaching and learning, because you want to bring more consistency and more rigor to what's going on within the school, sometimes to update a little bit in terms of teaching and learning, because this is right at the forefront of thinking about teaching and learning. And then there's the pragmatics, which all of you as principals know, which is that things like your market positioning are part of what you have to think about as in terms of all of that. So I want to move on to a sort of second area and ask people a little bit more about this, which is about, obviously we're talking here in the context of Catholic schools, and so you're values driven, and that's one of the things that we know is attractive about HPL to faith schools in general, is that the values are seen as equally important as the academic credentials. But I want to ask a little bit about that whole process of HPL within the Catholic context in the Catholic school. So maybe we'll start the other way around this time and ask St Edmunds about what that's like. And given that we haven't heard anything yet from you, Ali, would you like to start?
Yes. So I lead HPL in the prep, so I'm with the younger end of the school. And there's a clear link, obviously, between the Catholic social teachings and the values that run through HPL and empathy. So that's a very clear one for us to run with in the prep school. But also, a lot of the time we're asking the children to reflect on stories in the Bible and parables, and all of that develops their intellectual confidence. And we've really seen that grow since HPL has been embedded, and giving them the confidence to articulate their thoughts and reflect on what they're listening to, and being more open-minded and open to the beliefs of others, because we're not wholly Catholic, obviously, the children here. So it's being open-minded. And I have a child in my class who doesn't believe in any God at all, but actually HPL has really helped him approach RE with a really open mind. And when he first came here from another school, he absolutely didn't want to get engaged at all. And we've used HPL as a way to help him approach it and get involved. And he now speaks very articulately with confidence on a number of subjects and can reflect on the story. So for us, for the younger ones, it's really, really helped. And obviously, as I say, empathy is a key driver for us, and making those links with the Catholic social teachings and finding that, their inner talents and stretching those within it.
I think it's really helped our teachers to reflect back onto the real fundamentals of Catholic education, and that every child, reflecting on that every child in front of them is unique in the eyes of God, that they are here for an individual purpose, and that is something beyond us, but it is very special. It's not for us to judge, and that we tread carefully, but that we have the same high expectations of all of those children. As Ali mentioned, that pupil voice is a really rich thing. It comes through. It's one of those really important pillars in HPL. And I think, having the teachers reflect a little bit on actually what is their ethical stance? What do they believe in, and what do they want for the children that are in front of them, and how do they go about that? So what does that look like in the classroom or in CCF, or whatever sporting fixture they're doing? How does that come across? What language are they using? Are they engaging with individual pupils in a positive, constructive way? And I think it's definitely the faith centre of the school has really helped. It's helped both ways.
And I would say, yes, the link with Catholic social teaching is absolutely crucial. If you think about it, Catholic social teaching is not catechism. That's not what it is. It's about sort of rooting Catholicism in our concern for society, hence the Catholic social teaching. And then if you look at the HPL values, attitudes and attributes under empathetic, the subcategory under empathetic is concerned for society. So both Catholic education and HPL are united in having that all of what we're doing with the children should be rooted in benefiting society and trying to make society better. So if you're looking for a sort of link between HPL and, I don't know, saying lots of Hail Marys or explaining the Trinity or something like that, it's probably not going to be there. But in terms of that, it's that rooting in social mores and in the contribution that our children can make and will go on to make to society, which is absolutely central.
I do also think that at the heart of the faith is that we see the face of Christ in everyone, and there's that consciousness that, whatever we're trying to deal with, Matthew's brilliant at this, but, we try to approach things in a kind, considered, compassionate way. And that is equally prevalent in our lessons and in our teaching that we're doing. And I think the philosophy helps us do that. Our faith ties in very well with those things. And but it is, I'm not a Catholic, but when we have Catholic insets and training, there is that expectation that we are excellent at everything we do. So we have to strive for those really, really high standards in what we're doing.
So before I come over to Cheltenham, I just wanted to ask Mo a little bit around this, because we've been really grateful to work with you and SIS. And I don't think we would be working with you if you didn't feel that in some way this is a good fit. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Mo.
Yeah, it's been really interesting actually listening to colleagues. Matthew said, it's not changing what we are as a school, and I think that's really interesting. And then Kathy, you were speaking about a common language, like almost like a shared vocabulary for teaching and learning within the school. And I think we often perhaps, or we do particularly, I think at the moment, associate the Catholic aspect of our school very strongly with the pastoral concerns of our school and that aspect of a child's formation. But actually what is interesting is that, some people are talking about a Catholic curriculum and what is that? And whenever I kind of look into what that might be, one of the key things is what I call the horizontal conversations that need to take place across departments. It's kind of, and I generalize hugely, easier at prep level often. Often you might have teachers teach across a range of subjects. So those things are kind of implicit sometimes at those stages of education. And whereas when we go into the kind of the secondary element, things become much more stratified and much more siloed potentially. And actually, if we want to have a cohesive curriculum, we do need to have things that pull us together and allow us to have conversations and understand what is going on in history at the moment and how does that impact what I might be doing in RE or indeed in science or whatever. And what I find really fascinating about HPL is that it actually gives you permission. In fact, it wants you to. You need to have those horizontal conversations, which then make your curriculum much more cohesive. It's much more consistent, both in terms of how you, I hate the word deliver, how you share your pedagogy and how it is understood by the pupils. And so I find that it gets my kind of toes tingling. And when we think about, talk about Catholic education, it is about having life and having it to the full. And that's all aspects of our being. It's our mind, our body, and our spirit. And indeed, Declaration of Christian Education says that Catholic schools academically should be at least as good as the other schools in the area, at least as. So there's an imperative in what we're doing to give our children, our pupils, the capacity to flourish, both in mind, body, and spirit. So I think anything that is values driven, and that's what I really like as well. It is about each child's unique ability to attain their full potential. So anything that allows that, I think, sits very, very well within what a Catholic education is about. And as we know, the Catholic word, I'll stop now in a minute, but just say, the word Catholic means universal. So the diversity of both our staff and pupils in our Catholic schools is for me a real positive and a real opportunity to share what should be a great pedagogy. And if HPL gives us the frameworks and the permissions to kind of have those conversations and build that kind of academic identity within and around that Catholic identity, I find that rather exciting. So I'll stop now.
That's wonderful. If anybody wants to kind of comment or ask a question, do put it in the chat and we can pick it up. And I'm just going to come across to you, Matthew B, and ask a little bit about your thinking on that from your point of view, you and Chris.
Well, I think most of it's been covered, those comprehensive answers. But in terms of, I suppose, really, we really like the explicit nature of, things like working collaboratively and being concerned with society, something of fundamental values of what we're trying to instill in our students here. But also the real nature in terms of you're looking at students as individuals and that you have high expectations of them all, and we're going to work on how they operate to enable them to achieve that, because as Matthew said, we're surrounded by grammar schools, and so for us it's really important to emphasize that we look at every single person as an individual, and we're looking at what we can do for each and every individual to help them to flourish, and then tying that in terms of how we develop the moral nature of those students so that they work well together, and that to flourish is not just about themselves but how they work well with others, or how they are concerned and act with the best interests of society at heart as well. So I think it was a quite an easy way in which to actually dovetail the two things together.
I think to emphasise the point that Matthew made, one of the reasons, building on why we chose it, was that we didn't have to fundamentally change much about the school. It was in keeping with what we were as a school, what we are as a school, and the biggest challenge really has been around language. But as has already been said, the fact that then it's a common language across subject areas, across both sections of the school, has actually meant that it's brought us closer together rather than anything else, and given us the ability to do that. So, in the beginning, having various focuses on each of the areas actually was great for the school, great for the staff, great for the parents, and great for the students as well. So that's what I would add, and emphasise the point that Matthew made around, if I thought we had to make fundamental changes to who we were as a school to introduce it, we wouldn't have done it. Change is a difficult thing to do. None of us really like change. But actually what we've got here is an enhancement of what we already had. There wasn't change for change's sake. It was about enhancing what we were already doing and giving us a reason to do those things again.
I think I think that's really helpful, and I think that kind of feeling about the fact that it fits is important. That sometimes in school there's a kind of weariness about the upper echelons having another good idea, which we may or may not wish to embrace. And I think what happens with HPL is it just makes such a lot of sense to people. It doesn't stop you doing what you're doing now. In fact, it verifies some of the things you're doing. It just says that if you were using the full range of strategies and you were using them more frequently and regularly, that your students would be better placed to master those kinds of competencies. Because what we know is that in order to master them, you just need lots of practice. Some people need a lot more practice than others. So the more frequently they emerge in school, the better the chances for a wider variety of people to do well. And I think, you know, that's why you weave it into the warp and weft of the day-to-day, because that means it happens more frequently. It's not just about introducing these competencies into formal curriculum, but basically begins to pervade all aspects of the school, sort of informal curriculum, assemblies, other kinds of things. It's just the way it becomes a very natural part of the school. And in the end, it just sort of pulsates away in the background. It's not something massively disruptive, but it is significant. And I think that's the thing to kind of keep in mind, is if you make small changes, which are the right changes, the impact is very significant. So that's what you're really talking about. I mean, so that brings me on to, when we were discussing setting up this webinar, one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that we didn't, you know, just give you a kind of glossy picture of the big sort of, it's all wonderful and absolutely everything's amazing. But that we wanted to engage genuinely in all of this. So you've heard a bit about why people decided to opt in, and a little bit about how it fitted with their own institutions. So I wanted to ask our team of colleagues to talk a bit about, okay, so you began this in school, and when you introduce any kind of initiative or change in school, you know, it's not the easiest thing to do. So I wanted colleagues to talk about how did it go down, both in the first part of your journey and then over time, because both of these schools have been involved in this. St Edward's for a little longer than St Edmund's, but both of you have been involved in it for a while now. So this is probably something in the first instance for the HPL leads who are making this happen within school, and you know, I think you should be open and honest about, you know, how it all went, because it would be unlikely that everything will go 100% swimmingly, is what I say. So I don't know who wants to start. Any volunteers?
I don't mind. I think I probably had a slightly easier time in the prep. I think we were very lucky that the children embraced it fairly quickly and with great big open arms, as we decided to tackle the vocabulary first and the language. And so we completely changed our rewards system as a way to hook them in and get them engaged. So suddenly they weren't just getting house points, they were getting HPL points, and they had to explain why they'd got a house point, an HPL house point. And that incentive to actually get one when you're dealing with younger children was so great. They learned it very, very quickly. And before long, they were the experts in telling us why they got it and why they should probably get another one in another category because of X, Y, and Z. So the children, I found, embraced it, you know, in a better way than I could ever have imagined. The staff generally at the prep school were welcoming of it. As you said, you know, the appeal of having a consistency of language and consistency throughout the school, 3 to 18, really, really appealed to them. I did have a rather loud member of staff who wasn't as keen, who thought it was a gimmick and just another thing that we were going to have to try, and then it would get dropped. And so what was the point? And it didn't apply to his subject. So I worked with him on some of his lessons and said, try it, you know, try it from this angle, see how you go, come back, give me feedback, try it again. And to be fair to him, he did, and he is now probably our biggest advocate in the school for HBL. He shouts about it at every event he holds. And he's even created a programme for his subject that he's sharing with the senior college. So yeah, I just think you've got to try it and you've got to see that it does work, and it's not exclusively for one subject or another subject, or that it's a gimmick, but that it drives it, that it underpins everything you do, and it will actually dictate how you teach a lesson and what you get from that lesson, rather than seeing it as some add-on. So yeah, that was my experience down here.
Catherine?
Catherine, you need a different one.
Yes. So at college level, yeah, I think initially people, you know, were very positive. When their feet touched the ground, they did need, and this is understandable, they needed a toolkit, they needed things consistent across the school in every classroom that they could refer to, that were easy, things to help them use the language. There wasn't an expectation that you needed to learn this off by heart, but there was an expectation you needed to use the language explicitly and specifically, and not make it up. So they needed the language in their planners. The children needed it in their planners. They needed it on their whiteboards, and they needed the toolkit electronically. And yeah, and then I think in some ways the systems we've put in place have helped. Obviously, our reward system is a constant reminder. So it never, on a daily basis, it never goes away. It's constantly being used. It has helped change mindsets. And I think actually in line management meetings, obviously we've changed our lesson observation form to include the philosophy and the framework, so they have to comment on both. So how are they seeing both in action in the classroom? So that's generated some very good constructive conversations between teachers, between managers, line managers and teachers. And I think they saw quite quickly that it was who we are. So our co-curricular is equal to our academic. They are both, you know, important for each other and for us achieving that whole child. And that was really lovely, because our teachers, that's very important to them, that we are seeing that whole picture. I do think as we've gone on, really, we've perhaps engaged in more difficult conversations. So we're drilling down to how teachers and managers feel about student groupings, for example, how we introduced something called adaptive teaching 2 years ago. And are we seeing that in the classrooms? That's been very helpful for us in embedding HPL, particularly the philosophy. And yeah, we've had to look at our interviewing, you know, questions we were asking at interview, things like that. So yeah, I don't think the trickiness goes away in embedding it. I think it's you're constantly asking questions and reflecting on what's working, what isn't, but you get deeper and deeper. Somebody, a head of a key stage in a core subject, said to me just today, because we'd got together, she said, "Oh, the cards that we have on the board, we've moved beyond those now. So we're now on the stage progressions, which are where the children move through a particular aspect of HPL from 1 to 5, and the talk was about how she was going to use our bookmarks to help generate that ownership in the lessons. So I every time I feel I'm losing somewhere, I actually then have a really good win. So and Ali's absolutely right. I'm so delighted we do have a prep school, because just listening to the children and so much positivity is they're like sponges. They just it becomes something inside, and it's a feeling, how they feel about analysing and how they feel about being empathetic. And we will, of course, have lots of those pupils come through to us. So I'm delighted.
So just to comment on the fact that, I think it's the case that that some of the ideas and concepts within HPL are quite challenging. So it's very easy to say that we think that everybody could be a high achiever. It's very easy to say we believe in growth mindset. It's even relatively straightforward to start to signal that as you teach your lessons, that I believe you can, and if you're not doing it right now, it's just not yet. But when you get into it a little bit deeper, then you do start to question some of the things like, how do we group our students and what impact does that have on the people who don't make the top set? So HPL does not say that anything is right or wrong in terms of how you organise. That's up to you. But it's inevitable that you're going to find yourself, if you're thinking school, you're going to find yourself reflecting on certain things and questioning them. And I suppose part of what we provide for you and is in terms of, as you go through that process, is that you have a coach. And so your coach works with you to help you steer the choppy water. And I suppose it's just useful to know, before I then ask Matthew and Chris from St Edward's about the kind of value of that to you, of having a coach alongside you as you make the journey.
So in terms of when we started, I think it was quite fertile ground really, because we just started embarking on doing some evidence-led CPD, so looking at Carol Dweck, but also looking at metacognition and that sort of thing, in terms of where we were trying to transition the school towards that everyone could achieve and how we could get them to reflect on their learning. So it meant that people were in agreement in terms of there were different ways of doing things and were ready to evolve. I think the challenge we sometimes had was the range of language, which obviously comes across, the different ways in which you've got the ACPs and the VAAs and the various different subsets within them. So getting across understanding that challenge, but then also, like you said, a lot of it is in terms of evolution, not revolution. It was just looking at, well, we already do this, so why do we need to do it? I mean, it's talking about how we need to make it explicit. So trying to make that language a common theme and ensure that staff felt comfortable using the language, but also had the prompts and resources with them. And to help with that, obviously, you had to get away from the idea that it was a fad. So things then put in with change in terms of the systems that we use. So there was already an idea that we needed to move away for effort. So it was a really nice thing to look at behaviours for learning, or VAAs, in terms of, well, look, these are the characteristics which we think pupils need to implement if they're going to be successful. And that sort of thing made a big difference in terms of expressing it to our parents, and so they understand what we're trying to achieve, but also to the staff to make sure, no, this is now becoming a central thread through which we're working on. And so other aspects, like you said earlier about the settings, we had to get away from ability setting to go to performance groups. And again, with English, we removed those completely. With maths, because of different tiers of entries and that sort of thing, we've still got performance groups, but we've changed the language so students don't feel them as a ceiling. And all these sort of systematic changes, as well as doing the language, I think helped to embed that idea that, no, this is something we are serious about and we're going to constantly repeat. And I think one of the key things to help drive that change was having consistent messages. CPD and staff meetings, insets, we constantly referred back to it and revisited the language and what it meant for us and our students. And part of that is not only just educating the staff and the pupils, but also thinking how you engage the parents. So that was a big transition, as well as making them understand about how we're working with our teaching groups in terms of performance groups, what it meant now to behaviours for learning rather than effort. So those types of ideals changed. Looking at, we got rid of target grades in Key Stage 4 to aspirational grades and baseline grades. So looking at all systems changing, but understanding was all underpinned by what the underlying theories were behind in terms of HPL. And I think it took time. There certainly were some staff more keen to engage than others. But I think because we'd already started that process of looking at evidence-based teaching, we were already in that role that we knew things could change for the better. But some of the ideas, as I say, the performance grouping was a big sticking point. The language was another sticking point. And also making certain they saw it wasn't a fad, that it was something that was central to the school. I think so.
Yeah, think the you know, the kind of what we know about the language is that, you know, it is the research language. So you're bringing research evidence into school, and the terminology is very deliberate in that those are both the terms and the definitions are the research-based terms and definitions. And what's kind of interesting is, because we see a lot of schools, we know that the more precision you bring to that process, the better the outcome you get. It's about being tight around it. And so, you know, part of what we do in terms of supporting you from HPL is around enabling you to adopt in a way which gives you maximum impact, because we've done this with lots of schools, and it's certainly in the early days there were some schools that, you know, kind of made errors. So what I think it was Catherine was saying about the progression grids, which is how each of these competencies progresses from novice to expert over 5 stages. When we first started out, we introduced that right at the beginning in schools, but it's too much to swallow. So it's like you have to get to grips with the bank of competencies first and become familiar with them, and then inevitably people start to say, oh yeah, that's, as you said, that's not it's not helping us then to move from what does open-mindedness look like at the novice level, and what does open-mindedness look at the expert level. So for sort of, if I think my class are broadly in stage 3, how do I move into stage 4 in terms of thinking about that from a planning perspective? So it's kind of like the adoption, the introductory adoption. We call that familiarization and embedding. It's about helping people become familiar and beginning to embed it. But then you move into systematizing it and then ultimately optimizing it. And I think that it's a natural process. You don't have to tell people to do that. They just do that. They begin to kind of think, oh yes, that would lead to a discussion about that, or we need to think about that. We need to put that under the microscope. And the systems in place are either, you find your systems are either in alignment and fine, or they feel a bit uncomfortable and we need to think about them again. So that's just a natural process. And what we do from the centre through your coach and through also HPL Online, which has all the resources and exemplification from other schools and their practices, is just share to short circuit the process, so that you can, if you're grappling with a particular kind of issue, it's probable that your coach is going to tell you about another school that's looked at that issue and what they link you up to them, and or, you know, talk to them about what you've done. Your little bookmarks at St Edmunds are very popular with other schools. They like them a lot, because it shows the progression on any particular competency very easily and well.
I was just going to say that actually, that the collaborative nature between the HPL schools is really, really good, and the fact that you can go and visit another HPL school or contact someone, you know, that has really helped you find your own path with what works for you, and how another school has adapted things as well. And I just think that collaborative nature of sharing good practice and sharing resources really helps at the beginning, particularly.
So I'm just going to ask you to, each of you, just to tell me something that you, if I had to say to you, what is the one thing that you think you like most about HPL and has been most beneficial in your eyes? What would you pick? Where should we start?
I'll go first if that's all right. I think for us as a school, and actually this came up in our kind of 2-year review as to where we are, it's actually touching on all aspects of school life. So I think it's too simplistic to say it's just going to impact on the academic. And I talked about one of the reasons that we adopted it, and yes, that was. But actually the fact that it's given our co-curricular a real drive, a real reason to be part of it and to genuinely enhance the offering we have, it's brilliant. The fact that the students now will work out, right, well, if I take this club, then I get to demonstrate or practice different behaviours or values, which I won't get in this subject or that subject, particularly when it gets to GCSE and A-level and they've reduced, you know, the number of subjects that they're doing. It's great that the staff have embraced that as well. So they're saying, look, you know, you're short, or we have assessment reviews kind of every half term with the students. So they sit with their form teacher and go through, marry up their targets. Well, if you're short on these, or reading your reports, these are the aspects, these are the behaviours for learning that maybe you haven't had the opportunity to experience or practice this year. What about these clubs? What about these societies? So for me, the biggest thing and the biggest benefit that it's given us is actually life outside the classroom. So although we entered it thinking life inside the classroom and making sure it's helping us with results, actually it's what's been outside the classroom that's probably had the most measurable impact for us. I don't know if Chris would agree, but for me, that's where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of from the academic perspective, looking at making certain that the students know that we believe they all can achieve, and giving them that confidence that if they develop these attributes, it is going to help them be more successful than maybe they started a subject or started the year thinking they could be. So I think, you know, it really has helped us to embed within the students, you are in control of a lot of what the outcome will be. I think that's been a real positive as well from my perspective.
Catherine?
I think just over the years, we now, I feel, we have clarity of expectations. So that is, you know, we've put down on paper what we expect in the classroom and in lessons and in activities, what that looks like, what HPL looks like in action. And that therefore means that when we're doing CPD of new staff, when we're talking in interviews with prospective teachers, or we're talking to parents, we can be really clear about this is what we do and this is why. And I think that makes us very strong, because as was said, this is you know, our tagline is whole education, the whole child, and therefore roots back to our Catholic education, mind, body, spirit. And we have, I think, we have a level of confidence, I would hope now, that we can say these aren't negotiables anymore. These are non-negotiables. This is when I walk into a lesson or into a club. This is what I need to feel. This is what I need to see, and this is how you can achieve that. And they're very, very straightforward things. And we have that level of team spirit, I think, at the school, collaboration, where, you know, you can self-improve, and we get some, you know, you get great feedback from the children as well. So yeah, I love that, and it's every day is a surprise. Positive one.
Ali?
I think my favourite aspect's been the passion for it from the children, and they just love it, and it really, really comes from them all around the school. You can't escape it. And I've got a very keen HPL student body who, if they could, would see me every break of every day. And they've always got fresh ideas on what they want to do next and where they want to take it, and new resources that they've made to help in the classroom. And it's just this real drive from the children that I've really clearly seen. We recently had an open morning here, and every parent that came into my room said, I know everything about HPL. They said the children took them round, and they said, you know, they were just bubbling with it. And they were so proud of the work on the walls, and we've got lots of learning questions around the school that they've created or that they want to answer. And it's just become driven passionately by them, which is just lovely to see.
And I think, you know, that's one of the pieces of feedback that's a lot really nice. And it's one of the pieces of feedback we get a lot, which is that the students get it first. They get it before their teachers, because it just makes a lot of sense to them. And it's logical, it makes sense, and they just embrace it. And sometimes when you've got reluctant teachers, they're the people that are the influencers, because teachers listen to their students. And you know, we have many schools that have some sort of student council or steering squad or drive team or whatever they choose to call it. And those people are, you know, hugely influential in the way in which this comes to life in a school. And I think that's, you know, one of the pillars in HPL is this is about with students, not to them. So that kind of idea that a student's on their own learning journey, and this is them understanding it and knowing that they can progress within it and feel confident about that is, you know, part of what we're really talking about. Matthew.
I think what struck me, and this overlaps with the previous question slightly, because I was one of the slightly skeptical teachers that Kathy had to convert when I arrived, because we'd begun the journey already. And I think the moments when the penny dropped for me, and the bit I liked most, was the fact that most pedagogies, most new ideas in teaching, most new approaches to how to deliver a lesson are based on theories. HPL is based on science. It's based on neuroscience, and you can talk to a neurologist and they will back up the fact that any notion that our intelligence is fixed at birth or our ability is fixed at birth is like something out of the 1970s. Neurology has moved on, and education, it seems to me, hasn't. So that ticked a big box for me, but I still struggled to begin with. And I think there were two other moments. One was a comment from Deborah at one of the various conferences, and you said it again today, Deborah. It's every child can, not every child will. It's not a sort of magic silver bullet which is going to make every single child achieve, but they are all capable of it. And when your other analogy that I've heard you use before in the past, Deborah, is the driving test. But and stop me if I get this wrong, but you know, some people pass their driving test first time. Some people have to take their driving test 28 times before they finally pass. But most people who want to pass their driving test do pass it in the end. They are capable of doing it. It just takes some people longer to get there than others. And the more practice they have at their driving, the more likely they are to pass it. And that kind of made sense as well. And so for me, it's not just a theory, but there's significant evidence out there. I did get hung up a little bit about the whole notion of setting, because I do think, you know, there is still place for setting. Kathy and I will slightly disagree on this, but setting which is based on performance, is based on what a child is doing at that particular moment, and therefore the setting needs to be extremely fluid, and it must be perfectly possible to move between sets at a moment's notice as their levels of achievement change, and not setting which is based on how they performed in their 11 plus 5 years ago. So that I came around to that. The other thing which I remember getting hung up on about was the whole notion of gifted and talented. Well, where do we sit with gifted and talented? Well, again, just change the language. We still have a group in every year group, but they are the top 20 achievers at any particular moment in that year group. And people come in and out of that top 20 achievers as they achieve. So you can still stretch your highest achievers, still do all of that stuff that used to be called gifted and talented. You don't lose any of that, but you just got to be more flexible about who can take part in that, and accept the fact that there might be somebody who you'd never have dreamt would be in that group a year ago, who might suddenly be achieving much more highly and deserves that chance. So you don't have to throw away all of these things. You just need to think about it in a slightly different way and use slightly different language. Once I got all of that clear in my mind, I just sat back and thought, yeah, this makes sense. So I think what's my favorite thing is it makes sense.
But that's a great way to pull this to a conclusion. I'm just really grateful to Mo for making this opportunity possible, and for all of you who've been part of this conversation, for giving your time and your thoughtful insights. So for people who've been attending this webinar, obviously I hope what you have heard has been interesting and valuable to you. And from our point of view, you know, what we'd like to do is to invite you individually to have a bit more of a conversation with us at HPL. So we will send you an email with that offer to have a Teams to talk through your own context and your own thinking. But because, you know, everybody's context is slightly different, and we understand and appreciate that, and that's why HPL is a framework, not a program. It's not a one size fits all. It's meant to flex to accommodate whatever you're doing in your place. But I think what's lovely for me is when I asked if I could have some volunteer schools to participate in this in terms of St Edward's and St Edmunds. What's lovely for me is I could have had any of the Catholic schools that are currently HPL schools, because that's part of what we find is that people who do adopt, they just find it works and they want to share that with others. And the HPL community is a great community, both in this country and overseas. So actually the chance to, you know, kind of get to know and talk to people in other contexts and other countries is also really part of the richness of everybody being committed to. I think, you know, where I want to finish is really to say that, you know, I think when I began as a teacher many moons ago, you know, I went into teaching like most people do to try and improve the life chances of the children in our care. And I think what we now know from research is that we could probably do better than we ever thought in terms of outcomes. And so bringing that evidence into school and helping it to drive how you run your school, I don't think that's just something you might choose to do. I actually think it's a kind of moral responsibility to sort of, if we're serious about doing the best we can for our children, if the knowledge is telling us that if our knowledge is improving about what makes the difference, then incorporating that seems to be an important thing to do. So on that note, at 2 minutes past 5, you've all had really, really busy days, and I'm really grateful to you for spending time with us. And I'm very grateful, as I said, to all those people who participated. Cassie, who organises things for us from the HPL end, when she sent out the information about this, we had other HPL schools who actually said, you know, can we be part of that? That's how much people kind of enjoy it. So I think it creates a positive culture in your school, optimistic as well as ambitious. So it's not about pressure, it's about building from using what we know to build a better future. So thank you, everybody, and have a lovely evening.